In this video, we're going to restore an original Apple SuperDrive for the Mac SE30 restoration project. In our last video, we took a look at this pair of Mac SE30 computers from the early 1990s. One of them's beyond hope, but the other one looks pretty good for a restoration project. I like to respect your time, so this is not going to be an hour-long rambling video. I'll keep it short and packed with useful and interesting information, starting right now. This is a Sony model MPF75W-01G drive, but Apple just called it the SuperDrive. It increased the capacity of Mac floppy disks from 800 kilobytes to 1.44 megabytes while remaining compatible with the older 400 and 800K disks. The SE30 was the first Mac introduced with a 1.44 megabyte floppy drive, standard, although some late SE models did come with that drive. The drive is made up of several sub-assemblies that we will have to address to get it back into action. The drive mechanism is responsible for inserting and ejecting the floppy disks and aligning it properly with the read-write heads. This needs to be clean and lubricated to work properly. The read-write head assembly includes the heads themselves, along with a servo motor and worm gear to position the heads for reading tracks on a floppy. The heads are very delicate and must be handled carefully, and just like about everything else, they must also be cleaned to work well. The eject mechanism allows the computer to automatically eject a floppy disk. This includes a small servo motor, as well as a set of gears and a sensor that must be cleaned and properly lubricated to work. On the underside, you can see the DC motor that spins the floppy. This must turn freely and little if any lube should be used. Finally, the printed circuit board communicates with the SE30's main board and orchestrates the operation of all the drive's components. Now, the drive I have here is one that I've previously restored, and it'd not make a very interesting video now, would it? So, let's restore this one that looks like it's not been touched in decades. Now, in order to restore this old floppy drive, we need to address a number of things. This mechanism is not only flooded with decades of dust, but the lubricant used has dried and become more like a glue. These drives also have a gear in the eject mechanism that breaks down over time, so it'll have to be replaced. I'm going to start by blowing out the dust, and given that this is allergy season, I'm going to mask up and do it outside. If you've seen this video where I blew the dust out of the old printer in the kitchen, then you'll be glad to know I learned my lesson.
Oh my God, what are you thinking? Are you crazy?
Oh man, Dust City. Gotta get as much of the dust out of here as I can. All right, so that looks much better. Now that the bulk of the dust has been removed, I like to completely disassemble the unit, clean and service the chassis, then restore each subassembly in the order they need to be added back to the whole. So to start, we need to fully disassemble the drive. The first thing I want to do is I'm going to remove this small plastic piece right here. And what this does is this lifts the drive head when the disk is ejected, when the disk is open, which it's in the open position now. To remove it, all you have to do is carefully lift this little tab and then slide it off this way. It's really important while you're doing it not to lift this head up too much. Next, I'm going to remove the disk eject motor assembly. So what I need to do is there are two screws, one here, one right up in here. So there's a wire harness connected here. I like to just gently pry it up with a small tool. I don't want to be prying on the part that's soldered to the board. Once this assembly has been removed, I'm going to set it aside so that it is with its screws so I know which goes with what. So next I'm going to remove the disk head position motor. This small motor drives the head back and forth to access tracks on the disk. It has two screws and then a connector that need to be released. Once those are out, they can be set aside. So the next part I'm going to remove is the disk heads. It's right here. I need to release these two connectors here. This is the top and bottom head data connectors. Pull those out. The head's fairly loose. It's retained by two screws here and here down there. Those two screws are just retaining the rod that the disk head's right on. Once those screws are removed, the head mechanism will just lift right out, and then here is the disk heads. Next, we're going to remove the top disk guide mechanism here. To do that, we need to have it in the lower position. So what we need to do, pull this back a little bit, and then pull this until it pops and drops. Next, we need to remove the 2 springs that retain it, and that's all that's holding this on are 2 little springs. One right here, and one right there. All we need to do is release the springs on either side. Once those springs are released, what we do is we'll lift up on this side and you wiggle the floppy eject mechanism, the manual floppy eject. Just wiggle that a little bit and it should pop right out. Okay, the next part we've got under here is the bottom guide plate. And it is retained by 4 plastic retaining collars. These are just snapped onto grooves in the posts. So we need to very carefully remove them. What you do is you get up underneath there, carefully get a grip on it, pop it straight up. Take all 4 of those off. Once those are removed, this plate will just lift right out of here. And that leaves us with this, which is the chassis. It's got the motor, printed circuit board, bottom of the motor. So to start off with, I like to clean the part that everything else attaches to, get it nice in the way I like it. Then I will clean the parts that I took off in the reverse order I removed them and return them to the chassis. So when I'm done, everything's nice and pretty. So the first thing is going to be to clean up this. I don't want to get water on it. So I'll start off with a little bit more air to get some of the goobers I couldn't get to before. So now I'm going to go ahead and clean this. I'll just use some alcohol and try not to get it down in the motor. Clean a section and wipe it. Important to be careful with this optical sensor. This is the home position sensor for the disc head, and we just want to make sure it's clean. So when the disc gets back there, this little tab right here, this interrupts the photo beam. So I am going to clean the rest of this up off camera. It's just a lot of tedious cleaning and get it nice and clean and get as much dust out as possible. And then I'll be back. So this board was so filthy, I decided to go ahead and take off the 2 side rails, which normally don't need to be removed. They're just held in by a couple of screws on the top each, and then the bit larger one here has a screw on the bottom as well. I was concerned there was some corrosion under here, but it's just dirt and grime, so we're all right. Unless your drive is really, really nasty, I don't think it's usually necessary to remove those at all. All right, next, and I'm not going to show this part because you all know how to scrub things in a sink. Just going to gently scrub them with some detergent and some water. I am then going to put them on the output register of our heat system and turn the heat on to blow some warm air over them so that they don't have an opportunity to rust, so they dry very quickly. All right, started out by returning the rails back to their place, and those are back on. So next, what I need to do is return the bottom bracket. These cleaned up fairly well, but as you can see, there's a little bit of corrosion on these, and basically what's happened here is all that dust allowed condensation and moisture to be held against it over time. There's really not much you can do about that. When this goes back in, if you remember, it's just held in by some little plastic rings. And those rings fit over the notches in these posts. So you can see when this sits on here, that underneath the post, the metal washer is raised. So the points of contact for this are those 4 points. There's also, you can see on the bottom of the plates are some little raised bumps. And those bumps also slide on the bottom of the frame, like here we can see the wear. So between those 4 points and these 4 points, it just sits on there and slides. So what we need to do is provide some lubrication to minimize wear. If what you have is white lithium grease, that's just fine. That's what this is. I'm not going to use this in this particular case. I'm partial to my Tri-Flow. This is a synthetic grease with Teflon in it, and the Teflon allows the Tri-Flow to provide better lubrication over time. Grab just a little bit of grease on here, and I will apply it to these nubs. And you've heard me say it before, I'll say it again. When it comes to lubrication, I believe very strongly that less is more. I'd rather have not enough lube than too much in most cases. Too much lubrication will migrate and get into places you don't want it. So I'll just put a little bit of lube on there. I will put this back into place, and now it moves very freely. It just glides. I've rebuilt quite a few floppies over the years, but I've never had to deal with these little rings. What I found worked best for me is just find something with a small hole that's large enough to fit over the post. You just place the ring over the post, place the hole over the ring and the post, and press down until it snaps into place. Just snaps right on there. Those are in place. This moves freely, nice, smooth glide. Kind of surprised with just friction how well that works. The next part I have is the top part of the disc guide mechanism. Because I washed this in water, I want to replace a little bit of extra lube. Basically, there's two types of lubrication I'm concerned with on this. One is pivot points. So for instance, right here, there's a pivot point where that is metal on metal pivoting, and there's several points in here that do that. So I want to put the tiniest drop of oil where it can get down in there. I can't take those apart. They appear to be riveted on. So a little bit of oil there, a little bit of oil on the other pivot points. Then the other types of movements I have here are metal on metal sliding, like right here, right there, where the metal's sliding in there. For that, what I want to do is put a little bit more of this lithium grease. So I don't want this stuff to migrate. I needed the oil because it will migrate and get down in the pivot points. But for this, I want it to stay where I put it, so I'm using a grease instead of an oil. And sometimes you can really tell where you need to put grease just by where the wear is. So for instance, right here, you can see there's a little tiny bump in that metal, and you can see where it's riding against the bottom plate. So that is a spot that needs some lubrication, because that's a friction point. Then I'm going to take a cloth and I'm going to dab any loose oil, not the grease, just loose oil from the pivot points. I don't want that getting on discs. Don't want oil in your discs, I don't think. I don't know about you, I don't. All right, that looks good. When replacing the top plate, you need to get in underneath this little spike right here. So this is going to need to come in underneath that, and then the two bearing surfaces there. One of them goes in that slot, the other one goes in this valley. We'll turn it around, then just slide the eject mechanism to allow the post to get down into its notch. Once that's completely in place, then all you have to do to hold it in place is attach the two springs. There's one. There we go. So now if I push, locks up. All right, the next to get our attention is the print heads. I'm going back to good old isopropyl alcohol. Pretty grimy in there. Also want to be very, very careful with these fine little ribbon cables. You damage these and you are SOL, which stands for sorry, out of luck. Yeah, that's what it stands for. Really? No. The worm gear that moves the print head goes between this metal plate and this little pin. And the pin sits in the groove on the worm gear, and that's what actually physically moves the head. Wow, the grime is unbelievable in here. One of my habits is every time I get out a new swab, I will actually swab over the areas I've already cleaned to get more of the grime and gunk off without getting the swab all nasty, and then move on to areas that need a deeper cleaning. If, like me, you're used to Commodore, these print heads are not like the 1541 heads that have like a mechanism that allows them to separate. The only thing keeping the print heads together is this thin piece of spring metal. If you lift these heads apart too far, it will bend that and then they won't return to the correct position. Now I'm cleaning the heads themselves as the last thing. That's about as far apart as I ever want to separate them. I'm just carefully cleaning that. All right, those are good. Then I've also got the rod, and I'm just going to wipe this down with some alcohol. Amazing how hard this is to do when looking through a camera lens. So just slides through there. Once I get it installed, I'll put a little lubricant on it. And the heads just sit right back down in where they came from. The rod right here is up against the rail. Back here, it's up against basically a capacitor. And then the two screws go in and retain it in place. Then I will carefully return the print head. Sorry, print head, I'm a printer guy. I'll carefully return the head ribbons into their connectors. Next up is the motor that moves the print head. Next up is the motor that moves the drive heads. And you can see that worm gear is just pretty crusty and nasty. So I will just clean this up and get it back into place. About as clean as it's going to get. Looks pretty good. So when you put this in, you need to very carefully slide it in so that the plate goes underneath the worm gear. The plate there goes under the worm gear and the pin goes over it. So we slip it in here carefully like this. And then I have the two screws here that I kept aside so that I know which ones go where. Okay, I'm going to put a tiny drop of Tri-Flow on the rod just below each of the holes that the rod's going through. So one here and one up here. Then gently lifting the print head up just to get the pressure off that pin so I can still slide this. I will slide it back and forth a little bit just to distribute that oil and get it into the brass bushings, which you can see there's a brass bushing right up in there. Then I'm going to take a dry swab and just make sure there's not excess. Then next, back to the Tri-Flow grease and dab it on the print heads. Yeah, that's not what I wanted. Dab it on the worm gear. Okay, I'm going to set this aside. And next, this is the disc eject mechanism. And these are infamous for having a gear that fails. So we're going to replace that gear. I got a couple of spares off of eBay. They are 3D printed and they look lovely. All right, so first of all, let's just get some of the bulk of the dust off of this. All right, so in order to open this up, you need to remove this plate here. And the plate is held in place by a small snap. Pull that back to release it. All right, once that's released, this metal plate will come right off. So inside, you have a number of gears. And remove this one first. And then this gear here that's turning yellow, this is the gear that's so famous for going bad. And if I take it off, I was afraid to do this before because I didn't have a spare, but it's flexible. Honestly, I would say I'll save it because I think this gear would actually last a while, which surprises me. The other one I did was not going to last. So we've got some old grease and grime around the motor, on the gears, so we need to get all that cleaned up out of there. A little bit of alcohol, get this cleaned up. Okay, now I'm just going to take a little bit of the same Tri-Flow grease or white lithium and just get it in here on these gears. And I don't have to distribute it too terribly much. It will make its way around. We'll put the new gear in. Once the new gear is in, you need to set this to the right position, because once you put the next gear in, now it's locked. Then the plate goes back on. We'll just slip that down under there. The posts for the gears go through the holes, and if the holes are in the right place, then pull that snap back and on it'll go. Now to install this back in the machine, it's just a matter of returning it once it came. 2 screws on there. All right, last but not least, we'll put in the head lifting guide for that. I want this in the up position. So you can see it's got the tab and the side guides. So when you put it underneath the drive tab and slide it forward, it just locks into place. And you can see that the tab on the drive is on top. Right there is on top, so that when the disc is ejected, it lifts the head up. Now all we got to do is test it. Let's grab that SE30 and see how she does. Okay, so I got this set up on the bench. I know it looks a little bit precarious. I do have insulators between the drive and the frame and separators between the main board and the drive so that things can't hit each other. Drive isn't ideal sitting on its side, so it may be a little finicky getting the disc in, but it should work fine. So let's see what we get. Okay, so we got our mouse pointer like we did before. I'm gonna be very careful, and I'm gonna insert this disc in here the right way. What the heck, you know, the right way is always good. There we go. Hey, heads are moving. Welcome to Macintosh. So apparently we have a happy disk. And hey, we can see that this Mac will boot. This boot disk is an 800K disk that I picked up off of eBay. And the reason why I got an 800K boot disk was just for compatibility with older machines if I want to do an SE or a Classic or something. All right, we got a booted Happy Mac. Let's see if the eject mechanism works. It works. Doesn't like sitting on its side, but it works. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe for the rest of the series restoring this classic Mac computer. You can also catch the earlier video where we checked out a pair of garage sale SE30s, including the one we're restoring right here. It's as simple as to do that. Next we're going to remove the disc. Okay, next we're going to remove the desktop. Oh boy.